In May 2024, we took a trip to Turkey and Greece. In Turkey, we visited Istanbul, Ephesus, Pamukkale, and Cappadocia. And in Greece, we visited the islands of Rhodes and Santorini. Istanbul is famous for its fascinating culture in which East meets West, and the modern harmoniously coexists with the ancient. We will share with you our impressions of this remarkable city. The first thing you notice when coming into Istanbul is the heavy traffic. This, despite the fact that metros and trams run constantly one after the other. The motorways and main highways run smoothly enough, even though cars park everywhere on both sides of the road and are often double parked. There really is nowhere to park in Istanbul, which is the main reason we decided not to drive in that city. We took cabs mostly to get around. We took public transportation a little, but gave up after becoming confused and lost, even though we used Google Maps. When merging, the cabs bypassed the waiting traffic and then nosed their way in front of other cars. An ever-present plethora of motor scooters darts and weaves wherever there are the slightest gaps between the cars. They do beep their horns at least to let you know not to mess with them. The only good thing about being stuck in traffic is when you happen to be passing an important attraction, such as this 4th century Roman aqueduct. The second thing that surprised us about Istanbul was the cats. Feral cats. They can be seen perching wherever they can find shelter or a bit of warmth. People all over the city provide housing for their feline friends and set out food and water. It's a fairly cushy life for these vagabond pussies. Some have become famous, such as Glee, who lived in Hagia Sophia and even received a pat from President Obama during a state visit. As with humans, there is social inequality among cats. That's clearly the case with these two, one of whom is relegated to the street, while the other is pampered, napping in a window display. Regardless, they are cute and a constant source of entertainment for tourists. They feel perfectly content even in this crowded and chaotic city. You can purchase a stuffed replica to remember them by. A boat ride on the Bosphorus is a must-do for any tourist visiting Istanbul. We chose one with lunch and entertainment, and it turned out to be splendid. On the boat ride, we passed many of the landmarks that we later visited up close. This is Dolmabahce Palace, which served as the Ottoman seat of power in the late 19th and early 20th century. There are 3,000 mosques in Istanbul. Many, like this one, have lovely architectural details. Mansions and upscale apartments line the shores of the strait. The Rumeli Fortress was built by the Ottoman invaders during their siege of Constantinople in the 15th century. Built at the narrowest point in the Bosphorus, the Fatih Sultan Mahmud Bridge spans the point where the Ottomans successfully cut off Constantinople from sea trade during the siege. Waterfront mansions along the Bosphorus are called yalis. They cost millions. Beylerbeyi Palace was the summer palace of the Sultan in the 19th century. Maiden's Tower is a famous landmark that was featured in a James Bond movie. Sailboats were plying the frothy waves of the strait as we returned to port. Cruise ships like this one bring many of the 20 million tourists per year who visit Istanbul. The boat ride also included popular Turkish performances, a whirling dervish, and a belly dancer. The whirling dervish is actually a religious practice of the Sufi sect of Islam. Though performances like this take place throughout Turkey, these dancers are not true members of the sect, who only engage in this practice in private. Sufism was outlawed and the sect's property confiscated in 1925 by proclamation of the secular Turkish Republic under Ataturk. But the sect continued in secret. This performance was short, but a little whirling dervish goes a long way. Belly dancing is a form of folk dancing that originated in Egypt in the 1st century and is practiced throughout the Middle East. Mesmerizing is the only word to describe the undulating movements of the female torso. Belly dance is performed as a social dance, wearing ordinary clothes, mostly among female friends and family members. Galata Tower, which commands an unobstructed 360-degree view of Istanbul, stands as one of the more popular tourist attractions in that city. The walls are 4 meters thick at the base, and the stairways are actually tunnels in the wall. You're supposed to take an elevator up and walk down, but we wanted some exercise. The tower was built in 1348 during the Christian era by immigrants from the Italian city of Genoa, who had colonized this part of Istanbul. It was part of a walled fortification built by the Genoese. This virtual reality exhibit commemorates an event in 1638, when an Ottoman scientist named Herzfan Ahmed Çelebi glided from the top of the tower to the other side of the Bosporus Strait, a distance of some 3 kilometers, using wings he constructed. Visitors to Galata Tower can recreate his flight by standing in a certain place in the room and holding out their arms. Sensors detect arm movements and bank the wings left or right accordingly. Don't worry though, virtual Herzfan always makes it across the water and lands safely on his feet, as he reportedly did in reality. The event was said to have been witnessed by the Sultan, who rewarded the intrepid inventor by banishing him to Algeria, saying, "This man is uncanny. He is capable of doing anything he wishes. It is not right to surround oneself with such people. After the exhibit, we continued to climb up. Through the years, the tower has gone through many improvements and remodelings. These photos show historical images of the tower as it has existed through the centuries. More stairs. These are amphora, pots used to transport goods from the 2nd century through the Middle Ages. The Christians constructed a heavy chain across the opening to the harbor, but the Ottoman attackers got around this in 1453 by transporting their ships over land. We were feeling pretty chipper and didn't mind the stairs at all. Here we find one of the levels added long after the original tower was built. This is a model of a 9th century sailing ship discovered in 2007 in an archaeological site at Istanbul's Byzantine harbor. Up and up we go, higher and higher. The tower is an ideal place to get an overview of Istanbul. You can see in all directions. If the weather is too bad for the observation deck on the upper floor, you could very well see the city from here. This model of the city highlights its most important reference points. At 15 million people, Istanbul is Europe's most populous city and the 5th most visited city in the world. As we scan the city from the tower's observation deck, we see the Asian part of the city on the other side. The Galata Bridge spans the Golden Horn, followed by a metro suspension bridge and the Ataturk Bridge, all connecting the southern part of the city with the north. The far northern section of the city hosts modern high-rise skyscrapers. Topkapi Palace served as the administrative center of the Ottoman Empire and the residence of its sultans for 4 centuries, beginning in the year 1460. We entered the palace via the Imperial Gate, which leads into the first courtyard. This area is a large and pleasant park. After buying your tickets in the first courtyard, you enter the Gate of Salutation, which leads to the second courtyard and the museum proper. These large chimneys cover the former palace kitchens, now converted to museums. The Sultan Costume Collection, featuring clothing from the 15th and 16th centuries worn by the sultans and their families, is fascinating. That these garments exist is due to the custom of retaining the garments of former sultans and displaying them to important visitors. Many of the kaftans feature brocade made from silk woven with gold and silver thread. The plane trees in the courtyards are 500 years old, but they are still very much alive. The museum has a large collection of personal items of the sultans, which speak of the vast wealth accumulated by the Ottomans, derived from their control of all major land routes between the West and the Orient. This is the famous Topkapi dagger. These giant candle holders are made of pure gold. Islamic sacred relics are housed in the former private chambers of the Sultan. Elena needed to cover her head for this visit. Many of the relics are associated with the Prophet Muhammad. Articles of clothing, his bow, his sword, his footprint, hairs from his beard, dirt from his grave, a tooth, a pair of sandals. Here we find a letter from Muhammad to the monks of the Christian monastery of St. Catherine. It pledges to respect and protect Christians and Christian churches. The palace hosts a collection of 380 clocks and watches produced over 4 centuries. The timepieces come from all over the world, but 50 of them were made by Turkish master clockmakers who were members of the Sufi Islamic sect known as Mevlevi dervishes, the so-called whirling dervishes, or followers of the Rumi, the 13th century Persian poet. The Ottoman Turks were famous for being fierce warriors, and Topkapi contains a large collection of all kinds of weapons and armor from the time of the Ottoman Empire. Some of them are jewel-studded and finely crafted, and were received as gifts. Dolmabahce Palace was the headquarters of the Ottoman Empire in the latter 1800s and early 1900s. The palace grounds are lovely. The palace itself is huge, 285 rooms, 46 halls, 6 hammams, and 68 toilets. Taking pictures inside is actually prohibited, so we only got a few videos before we were stopped. The palace is right on the Bosporus and has some stunning views. The garden features statues of lions, and what do you know? Lurking around the statues you can find, that's right, their cousins, Felis catus. They are most proprietary and not at all respectful of royalty. Elena likes the elaborate gates and wanted to pose in front of one. We visited the Blue Mosque, one of Istanbul's most popular tourist attractions. If you're wondering why it's called the Blue Mosque, it's because of the 20,000 cobalt blue Iznik tiles that decorate the walls of the interior. The official name is the Sultan Ahmed Mosque, after the Sultan who commissioned it in about 1600. Notice the stained glass windows throughout. They were originally Venetian glass, which at the time was the finest glass in the world. An unusual feature is the enclosed outdoor courtyard. There are 6 minarets, which signify its importance in the Islamic world. Next to the Blue Mosque stand a number of ancient monuments that adorned a Roman hippodrome located here. The snake heads are missing from this Greek sculpture of 3 serpents intertwined. The artifact is 2,400 years old. The hieroglyphs on this Egyptian obelisk, brought here by a Roman emperor, boast of a conquest by Thutmose III, the most violent of all the Egyptian pharaohs, who pillaged his way across much of the Near East in the 14th century BC. The Hagia Sophia is utterly fascinating, both for its 1,600-year history and as an architectural marvel. Originally the largest Christian cathedral in the world, it was converted to a mosque following the Ottoman conquest of Constantinople. But after Ataturk proclaimed the secular Turkish Republic in 1922, Hagia Sophia devolved into a museum, only to be converted back into a working mosque in 2020, a highly controversial action that led to widespread consternation among Christians. We were allowed to visit the gallery, where a hefty entrance fee is charged to foreign tourists. We saw foreigners being admitted to the floor of the mosque, however. It seemed that you only needed to say that you were going to prayer. These amazing book-matched marble tiles make up the floor of the gallery. The vaulted ceilings are plastered over and painted with Ottoman designs, but originally they were covered with exquisite tiny 1/4-inch mosaics. In places, the plaster was removed during the period when the Hagia Sophia was a museum, revealing the much more sophisticated designs beneath. In this clip, you can see where a mosaic of the Virgin Mary in the far semidome has been covered over with curtain. Imam was leading prayer while we were present in the gallery. Here you can see a Byzantine-era mosaic of a seraphim in the triangle between the roof arches. There are patches where the plaster has been removed to reveal the original mosaics in the ceiling. The Christian mosaics in the gallery are especially remarkable. Covered over with plaster and paint during Ottoman rule, they were restored when Hagia Sophia was converted to a museum. The government of Turkey has promised to preserve and protect them. What would a trip to Istanbul be without a visit to the Grand Bazaar? The building itself is beautifully ornate. And it's big, 7.5 acres with over 4,000 shops. Hundreds of thousands of tourists get lost in its maze of corridors every day. The main hall has more upscale shops. Large portions of the market are devoted to jewelry. If you can't find the bijou you're looking for here, it probably doesn't exist. Some streets are specialized. There is one for rugs. This one is devoted to porcelain. We also visited the nearby spice market. The aromas here are a delight. We bought 3 kinds of exotic herbal tea and enjoyed them during our trip. Turkey is famous for its delicious desserts, and we couldn't resist sampling some baklava at this tea shop.